August 12, 1984. Crater Lake National Park, Oregon. 7:42 a.m. The morning mist curled over the rim of the lake like breath from a sleeping animal. Sunlight hadn't yet broken through the dense canopy that lined the park's southern edge, and the surface of the deep, impossibly blue crater remained still, as it had for centuries. The silence was profound, broken only by the faint crunch of boots over volcanic gravel. He signed the register with neat handwriting. Name Daniel Whitaker from San Francisco, California. Purpose, solo hike, rim to summit. Date, in 8/12/84. Estimated return, 8484. The ranger at the Steel Visitors Center barely glanced up as Daniel handed the clipboard back. Just another quiet guy in his late 20s, wiry, sun-kissed skin with a light beard and the kind of gear that said, "I've done this before." Not flashy, not loud. A man who packed smart and moved light. "Weather's clear, but it'll drop fast at night," the ranger said. Daniel nodded. "I've got layers. Last water point is Cleetwood Cove. After that, it's just you and the trees." Another nod, confident, quiet. Daniel wasn't the type to leave a trail of stories. No blog, no postcards, no late-night calls to family. His sister Rachel would later describe him as obsessively independent. His landlord just said he paid early every month. That's all I knew. He was 29. No spouse, no kids, no known enemies. He told a friend weeks earlier, "I just need a few days in the woods. No one talking at me, just stillness." He got his wish. By nightfall, Daniel had reached the eastern rim and set up camp on a ridge barely visible from the main trail. He pitched his tent beneath a grove of Douglas firs far off the official path. The view was stunning. The lake, a perfect circle of indigo, stretched out below like a forgotten mirror. No one else saw that view that night, and no one would ever see Daniel again. San Francisco, California, August 18, 1984. Rachel Whitaker didn't panic right away. Her brother Daniel was notorious for late calls, solo trips, and a quiet disregard for other people's clocks. But by the sixth day, something felt different. He hadn't returned to work. His landlord hadn't seen him. The plants in his apartment window were wilting, and the answering machine blinked zero. Rachel stood in his cluttered studio apartment off Height Street, surrounded by books on geology, a disassembled mountain bike, and several unfolded topo maps of Oregon. On the kitchen table sat a note in Daniel's handwriting. "Gone to Crater Lake. Back Tuesday or Wednesday. Don't worry." Tuesday had come. So had Wednesday. Now it was Saturday. Rachel dialed the Crater Lake Ranger Station. A woman with a clipped tone confirmed he had signed the trail register on August 12th, intended to return by the 14th, and hadn't checked out. "Sometimes hikers go off schedule," the ranger said. "He might have added a loop without telling anyone," Rachel asked. "He's alone out there." "We'll file it," the ranger said. "If he doesn't show by tomorrow, we escalate." Thanks for watching. Please kindly subscribe to the channel as we are aiming to reach 1,000 subscribers. Yes, now thank you. By Monday morning, a formal search was initiated. 2 rangers hiked the rim trail. A helicopter was dispatched. Volunteers combed nearby campsites and unofficial paths. They found his tire tracks at the Cleetwood parking area exactly where his permit said he'd begin. His car, a rust-red Subaru hatchback, was still there. Windows clean, locked. Inside a guidebook, trail mix, and a photo of Daniel and Rachel at Uzite 1978. But there was no sign of Daniel. Not on the ridge, not along the trail, not by the water. The first week turned up nothing. No tent, no boot prints, no gear. Just an empty space where a man used to be. Rachel stayed in Oregon for a month. She made flyers. She joined the search teams. She asked every ranger, every clerk, every camper. Each night, she returned to a roadside motel near Klamath Falls, staring at the wood-paneled ceiling, whispering his name into the silence. She never stopped calling. But after 30 days, the park declared the case missing, presumed deceased. Crater Lake National Park. 13 years later, September 2nd, 1997. The air at Crater Lake hadn't changed much in over a decade. Crisp, dry, and still laced with that ancient pine scent that settled deep into clothes and memory. Ranger Miles Kernan knew it well. After 22 years with the Park Service, he could read the forest like a story carved into the bark. On that quiet September morning, he stood next to a new seasonal recruit at the south entrance, flipping through his weather-worn notebook. They were scheduled to do a perimeter walk through a lesser-used path, the Hematite Ridge, a place locals avoided for its sharp drops and unreliable footing. "Why don't we send the drone instead?" the rookie asked. Miles chuckled. "Because I don't trust anything with a battery more than I trust my own boots." He wasn't a sentimental man, but the old places had pull, and Hematite Ridge was one of those places where memories stuck. Not all of them pleasant. Midway through the hike, the trees began to thin, and a cold wind whispered up from the basin. That's when it struck him. A cluster of stones at the base of a split cedar arranged in a circle. Miles stopped walking. That wasn't there last year. "What do you mean?" the rookie asked, following his gaze. "I walk this path every spring. That circle, it's man-made and it's new or someone maintained it." They knelt beside it. Under the leaves and pine needles, the rookie brushed away a layer of moss, revealing a canvas loop. Canvas, faded, tangled, zippered. It was the corner of a tent, barely visible under a thick mat of growth. Miles stood slowly, something hardening in his chest. "I think we need to call this in." By nightfall, the area was taped off. Crime scene lights bathed the clearing in a sterile glow. Search dogs barked and clawed at nearby trunks. And within 30 feet of the original site, another discovery came. A buried backpack still sealed, still labeled on the inside. Property of Daniel Whitaker, Crater Lake National Park. September 3rd, 1997, 6:20 a.m. The sun rose slow and pale over the ridge as investigators marked off the site. Beneath layers of moss, bark, and pine needles, they uncovered the rest of the tent, crushed by a fallen branch, but largely intact. The cold, dry mountain air had acted like a time capsule. The canvas, though stained and worn, hadn't completely rotted. Inside they found a collapsed sleeping bag zipped halfway, a rusted camp stove still packed neatly in its case, a cracked plastic water bottle half full, and most chilling, a pair of men's hiking boots placed side by side at the tent flap. There were no signs of struggle, no blood, no torn fabric, just a sense of something paused, as if the camper had stepped out for a moment and never returned. Later that day, beneath the shallow drift 5 feet away, searchers hit something harder than soil. It was a metal box, old and scratched, sealed with a weathered clasp. Inside a journal, a field notebook, Daniel Whitaker's. The first page read, August 12, 1984. Made it to the ridge. The view is something else. No sounds but wind and squirrels. Perfect. The entries went on for 3 days. Calm, quiet. Descriptions of weather, trail markers, thoughts about solitude. But the final entry dated August 15th was different. Saw someone today on the ridge. Not a ranger. Didn't wave back. Just stood there. Still watching. I think something's off. The handwriting trailed. The last line was half-written. Forensic texts were cautious. The ink had faded, but under UV light, it was legible enough. It's definitely Whitaker's hand, one analyst confirmed. But what's most interesting is that the ink shows no signs of water damage, meaning the notebook was sealed before the storms. He packed it intentionally. So he knew something was wrong, the ranger said quietly. By dusk, a small collection of items had been recovered and logged. A pocket knife unopened. A rolled sleeping mat never used. A photo slightly damp but visible of Daniel and his sister Rachel. Nothing else. No signs of an animal. No cliff nearby. No bones. Just gear and absence. Word traveled fast, and 700 miles away in a small bookstore in San Francisco, a woman picked up the phone to hear the words she hadn't expected in 13 years. Miss Whitaker, we found your brother's campsite, San Francisco, California, Crater Lake, Oregon. September 6, 1997. The moment Rachel hung up the phone, her hands began to shake. She stood still in the middle of her bookstore, her breath caught somewhere between relief and dread. The words echoed in her mind. We found your brother's campsite. Not body, not remains. Campsite. She packed a small duffel and left the store in the hands of a friend. It was a 12-hour drive. She didn't stop once. The ranger station at Crater Lake hadn't changed much since 1984. Same wood paneling, same faded posters about wildlife safety and altitude sickness. But behind the counter was a younger face, someone who didn't know the name Whitaker the way the old rangers once did. They're waiting for you at Hematite Ridge, the woman said, handing Rachel a laminated pass. I don't want to see pictures. I want to see where he was. A parked vehicle drove her through switchbacks and gravel paths until the trees gave way to a narrow overlook near the edge of the ridge. There, under a yellow tent canopy, stood Ranger Miles Caron. Older now, grayer, but instantly familiar. "Rachel," he said softly, removing his hat. "I remember you," she said. "I remember you, too. You didn't give up." She walked through the site slowly. The items had been laid out neatly on a folding table, not for public view, but for her: the journal, the backpack, the boots. Then she saw the tent, its frame partially reassembled for context. She froze. "This is where he was?" she asked. "Yes." "And nothing else?" "No. No." "Him?" Miles shook his head. "It's like he vanished in daylight. Everything was left behind, but no body, no drag marks, no trace." Rachel stepped into the tent opening. She stood where her brother had stood, looked out at the trees, the ridge, the endless blue lake below, and then her eyes locked on something just past the brush. A narrow animal trail leading into the woods, barely visible, not marked on any park map. "Did anyone search that path?" she asked. Miles followed her gaze, frowning. "That's not an official route, but someone might have taken it, or someone came from it." Rachel turned to him, her voice steady. "I want to follow it." Hittite Ridge, Crater Lake National Park, September 6, 1997. Late afternoon. The trail was barely a trail at all, more like a whisper of flattened grass between the trees, hidden behind a curtain of overgrowth. If Rachel hadn't noticed it from the right angle, it might have remained invisible forever. Ranger Miles hesitated. "We shouldn't go far," he said. "It's late, and this area is off-grid. No radio reception, no markers. Just a few minutes," Rachel insisted. "I need to see." She led the way, surprising him with her confidence. The pine needles muffled their steps, and the forest thickened quickly. Light filtered in through thin shafts, but shadows clung to every branch. They moved in silence for nearly 10 minutes until something changed. The air cooled, the trees grew sparer, and then ahead a clearing. It was small, ringed by stones, and at its center stood something unnatural. A wooden structure no taller than a man's waist, built from thin branches and bark, carefully stacked, delicately balanced, almost like a shrine. On top of it rested a smooth river rock painted with faded streaks of red. Beside it, a strip of nylon fabric, torn and sun-bleached. Rachel stepped closer. The nylon was faded tan, the same color as Daniel's tent. "This wasn't done by an animal," she whispered. Miles crouched. "Someone built this intentionally. But who and when?" There were no recent footprints, no signs of fire, no fresh tools. Just this monument, abandoned, deliberate. And then Rachel saw something else scratched into the bark of a nearby tree, almost invisible unless the sun hit it just right. D.W., August 1984. She touched the engraving like it might still be warm. "He was here," she said. "He came this way. But why leave the tent? Why abandon everything?" Rachel didn't answer because in her chest a new question had started to form. One that chilled her far more than any Oregon wind. Did someone make him leave? Crater Lake National Park Ranger Station. September 7, 1997. The next morning, Rachel sat across from Ranger Miles in a small conference room that smelled faintly of damp canvas and burnt coffee. On the table between them were several folders, old, yellowed, and stamped with the same 3 words. Unresolved missing persons. I pulled everything we had on disappearances between 1975 and 1990. Miles said most aren't related, but he opened a file marked Thompson Allen, 1979. A solo backpacker who vanished during a 3-day hike near the northeast rim. No remains were found, no gear recovered. Only his car parked at the same Clelitwood lot as Daniel Whitaker's years later. Another file. Susan Klinger, 1982. A 31-year-old photographer last seen near Cleewood Trailhead. Her camera bag was found 2 months later at the base of a ravine, but no trace of her. Not even the rule of film. How many of these people were solo? Most. And how many were last seen within a few miles of Daniel's route? Miles exhaled slowly. 6, maybe 7. Rachel leaned forward, her voice low. And has anyone ever considered that someone out there might be targeting them? Miles hesitated, not because it was a wild theory, but because he'd considered it once himself years ago, quietly without writing it down. There was talk among the old rangers. But the park didn't want speculation, nothing provable, no evidence, no arrests, just people vanishing. And now you found Daniel's tent, his notebook, and a shrine in the woods built by someone, Miles added. Rachel pointed at the files. Someone who's been out there watching, waiting for people who come alone. Later that day, Rachel visited the last known place her brother had stood, the edge of Hematite Ridge. From there, the trees stretched in every direction, quiet, imposing, untouched. How many places could a person vanish in that forest? How many shrines were hidden in that expanse? She closed her eyes and whispered, "What did you see, Daniel?" The wind answered with silence. Medford, Oregon, Archives Division, September 9, 1997. 2 days after returning from the ridge, Rachel sat in a dusty back room of the Jackson County Records office following a hunch. Susan Klinger, the photographer who vanished in 1982, had her bag recovered, but the official file had said the camera was never found. But tucked inside one of the folders that Ranger Miles provided, Rachel had noticed a discrepancy. A 1982 evidence receipt from the Crater Lake Ranger Station listed a damaged Olympus OM1 with 35mm film roll intact. Yet in the main report, no mention of a camera, no photos ever processed, no record of the film being developed. So where was it? After 4 hours of digging through cross-reference storage logs and dusty archive boxes, Rachel finally found it. Box 14B/1982. Evidence not claimed. Inside a cracked Olympus camera, a sealed Kodak film canister labeled KLN-082. Can this still be developed? She asked the archivist. The man frowned. After 15 years, depends. If it wasn't stored hot, maybe. Rachel didn't wait for protocol. She took the roll to a specialty lab in Eugene that worked with old and damaged film. It'll take 3 days, the tech warned. Could be blank, could be gold. September 12, 1997. For 47 p.m. Rachel received a call. M. Whitaker, the technician said slowly. You need to come see this in person. The images were grainy, faded at the edges, but the last 3 frames made her breath catch in her throat. Frame 34. A wide shot of Crater Lake from an unfamiliar angle, possibly off-trail. A silhouette, likely Susan herself, captured in reflection from the lens. Frame 35. A closer image of a wooden structure not unlike the shrine Rachel had seen in the woods. The painted stone clearly visible on top. Frame 36. The camera aimed slightly off-kilter, as if hurriedly raised. A figure partially obscured by trees, standing still, watching, not close enough for facial detail, but undeniably male, wearing dark weathered clothing. The head is slightly turned. One arm is lifted, holding something. Not a camera, not a bag, possibly a tool or a weapon. Rachel felt her stomach twist. The technician looked at her nervously. I've developed a lot of old rolls, but I've never seen one that ended like that. She asked for prints and a copy on digital tape. And as she left the building, she whispered, You saw him too, Susan. Crater Lake National Park Headquarters, September 14, 1997. Rachel spread the 3 grainy photographs across the conference table, their faded hues almost glowing under the harsh fluorescent lights. Ranger Miles leaned in, his jaw tight as he studied the final frame. The one with the figure lurking in the trees. This was taken in 1982, Miles asked. Yes, Rachel confirmed. And nobody ever saw these. Not the press, not even the investigators. The room went quiet. The rookie ranger seated nearby shifted uneasily. Could that be Daniel? The rookie asked. Maybe he crossed paths with No. Rachel cut in sharply. Daniel was 29. This man looks older, broader. He's carrying something. Miles nodded. If Susan saw him out there, maybe she stumbled onto something she wasn't supposed to. Maybe Daniel did, too. Rachel took a deep breath. Then why was the camera buried in a storage box for 15 years? Miles frowned. Back then, things got overlooked. Staff turnover, no digital indexing. It's possible someone thought it was irrelevant. Rachel shook her head. It didn't feel like an accident. It felt like someone wanted the camera forgotten. That night, Rachel couldn't sleep. She stayed at a small lodge near the park entrance, staring at the photos under the dim lamp. The silhouette haunted her, his stillness, the way his head tilted slightly, as if he knew the camera was there. She remembered something Daniel had written in his journal. Saw someone today. Not a ranger. Didn't wave back. Just stood there still watching. A chill ran through her. What if this was the same man? September 15, 1997. 11:22 a.m. The park dispatched a small team to the clearing where Daniel's tent had been found. Rachel insisted on going along with the photos in hand. They compared landmarks, tree lines, and ridges. Then a ranger spotted it. A second unmarked trail leading north. This one wasn't natural. It had cut marks on the branches, deliberate, but old. Over a decade old. They followed it carefully for a half-mile before coming upon something unexpected. A collapsed structure. A crude lean-to made of rotting logs hidden behind a thick wall of cedar. Inside they found a rusted metal pan blackened by soot, a pair of broken binoculars, and a fragment of photographic film degraded but still coiled. Rachel's breath caught. It felt like someone had lived here, watched here, maybe even waited here. Miles examined the pan with a gloved hand. This wasn't Daniel's camp. It's too far from his site and too permanent. So who built it? Crater Lake National Park, north of Hematite Ridge, September 15, 1997, 3:40 p.m. The structure was nearly invisible unless you were right on top of it. Logs and brush had been layered deliberately, camouflaging the lean-to into the hillside. Moss had grown over its seams, and pine needles carpeted the roof like a shroud inside. The air was colder. Still, Rachel crouched by the old stove pan. It was rusted through, the base warped by years of heat. Nearby, a half-buried tin cup sat filled with blackened leaves. There was no garbage, no wrappers, no bright-colored gear. Whoever lived here was careful, intentional, quiet. Not a hiker, Miles murmured. Too remote, too concealed. Rachel agreed. This wasn't someone passing through. This was someone hiding. The rangers spread out around the perimeter, working with gloved hands and plastic evidence bags. It didn't take long to find more. A strip of wool cloth patterned in green and brown, possibly from a hunting jacket. A matchbox, the type manufactured in 1978. Half the matches still inside and beneath a loose stone near the far wall. A small plastic pouch sealed with tape. Miles opened it slowly. Inside 7 photographs, water-damaged, curled at the edges, but visible. Each showed the same view. The overlook from Hematite Ridge taken at slightly different times of day. Surveillance, one ranger murmured. Rachel studied the photos, her hands trembling. In 2 of them, distant and blurred, she could just make out a figure standing near the ridge's edge. A man in another. A woman with short hair holding a notebook. Rachel's knees buckled slightly. She sat on a rock. "That's me," she whispered. "That was 13 years ago. My first trip here." Someone was watching the overlook, Miles said grimly. And not just once. The implications settled over the group like ash. This wasn't a random place where someone had squatted for a season. It was a lookout post maintained, hidden, and likely abandoned shortly after Daniel disappeared. One ranger broke the silence. Do we have any idea who it could have been?" Miles looked at Rachel, then at the worn jacket scrap, the photos, the camera that had never been filed, the map entries that didn't exist. "I think we've been asking the wrong question. It's not who was here. It's how long they were here and how many people they saw vanish." Crater Lake Ranger Station. Archives Room. September 16, 1997. 9:10 a.m. Miles arrived early. He didn't want eyes on him. The file he needed wasn't part of the public system. It lived in a metal cabinet labeled Staff Memoranda, internal use only, buried in a back room behind old fire risk reports and seasonal hiring records. He unlocked the drawer, thumbed through the folders, and pulled a slim binder with no case number, only a label. Inquiries not pursued. Remote incidents. It had been assembled in the early 1980s by a former park supervisor who'd retired quietly, never making a fuss. Inside were just a handful of pages, memos, ranger notes, a few maps with circles drawn by hand, and one name that kept appearing. H. Clemens. Miles frowned. He'd never heard the name. One report caught his attention. April 1981, Incident Report, Northwest Rim Vicinity. Written by Ranger Tom Ellison. Unidentified man observed walking cross-country with pack. Declined assistance. No permit on file. Fit description of earlier suspicious sighting. September 1980. Campfire remnants found nearby with carved stick figures. Area flagged for patrol. No further contact. Another memo. August 1982. Volunteers note. Saw same man from last year near Sunch. Just standing. Noticed us. Then walked into the trees. Didn't speak, wouldn't respond. We were with a high school group. Rangers said to let it go. And finally, June 1984. Briefing summary. Solo male, possibly 50s, gray beard, observed watching hikers near Cleetwood Cove. Reported by family. No confrontation. Matched prior Clemens description suggested in memo. Long-term squatter hermit. No action recommended. Miles closed the file slowly. It was all there in plain sight. Someone had been living in the park, watching people for years, and the Park Service had chosen not to act. He copied every page and returned the file before anyone else arrived. Then he called Rachel. "I think I found him," he said. "Who?" "The man in the photo. The one from Susan's roll from Daniel's journal. From the Linto. Does he have a name?" "We think it's Clemens. No first name, no ID, just sightings for nearly a decade." "Is he still out there?" Miles hesitated. "If he is, he's been hiding in the woods for over 20 years. Eugene, Oregon, Public Records Division. September 17, 1997. The name H. Clemens wasn't much to go on, but Rachel knew where to start. Voter rolls, property tax records, and census archives. If this man had ever owned land, paid taxes, or even applied for a driver's license in the state of Oregon, something would remain. She sat for hours scrolling through microfilm and typed registries. There were a few Clements in the southern part of the state, but most didn't match. No criminal records, no park ranger citations, no complaints filed. But then she found a listing. Howard Clemens, born 1923, Lake County, O, status presumed deceased. Last activity 1979. Notified next of kin. None listed. The man would have been in his late 50s in the early 1980s, the same age estimated in the ranger sightings. Curious, she looked deeper. Howard Clemens had worked as a forestry surveyor in the 1950s and 60s. No spouse, no children. In 1977, he took early retirement and purchased a hunting cabin outside of Prospect, Oregon, not far from the southwest edge of Crater Lake National Park. In 1979, property taxes stopped being paid. In 1980, the cabin was seized and left abandoned. There was no record of Howard ever relocating, just silence. Crater Lake National Park. Later that day, Rachel met Miles again, this time with a print out of the file. She had a cabin near here. He was in the woods for years, then just vanished from public life. And the sighting started the same year. He didn't disappear. He moved in. They both stared at the forest through the ranger station window. It was easy to imagine someone slipping between the trees and never coming out again. Easy to imagine someone learning the trails, the blind spots, watching hikers from a distance, learning which ones were alone. Rachel glanced at the final page. Howard's military service, World War II infantry scout, stationed in the Pacific, expert in survival, land navigation, and silent movement. He could have survived out here, Rachel whispered. He did survive out here, Miles replied grimly. For decades. Do we know when the sighting stopped? Miles checked his notebook. The last reported one was in 1987. A ranger swore he saw him from a lookout tower at dusk. After that, nothing. Rachel's eyes narrowed. That's the same year the disappearances stopped. They looked at each other, the same thought forming between them. So what happened to him? Sisu National Forest Winmra Lookout Tower, September 19, 1997. The old ranger, Don Weaver, had been retired for nearly a decade when Rachel and Miles found him living in a modest trailer outside Grants Pass. He moved slowly now, his back curved with time. But when Rachel mentioned the name Clemens, his eyes sharpened like he was back on duty. "You're talking about the ghost," he muttered, pouring black coffee into enamel mugs. "I saw him once, fall of '87, never went public." They sat outside under a brittle pine, the sun low behind the hills. "Where exactly did you see him?" Miles asked. "Northwest side of Crater Lake, Windmere Tower. I just climbed up for evening watch. Fog was coming in heavy from the basin. I was scanning with the field glasses when I saw movement near the old lava shelf." He paused, took a slow sip. Tall man, long coat, hood or something. He wasn't hiking. He was just standing still facing the tower. "Did you try to radio him?" "Didn't need to. He never looked away. Never moved. I kept the glasses on him for 15 minutes. Then the fog swallowed him up." "Could you see his face?" Don hesitated, then nodded but slowly. "Kind of gray beard, weathered skin. He looked like someone who hadn't lived indoors in years." "Did anyone else see him?" "I logged it, but nobody followed up. My supervisor called it a trick of the light." He pulled out an old cigar box from a side cabinet and placed it on the table. Inside were scraps of memorabilia, a tower badge, a few pressed wild flowers, and a weather log handwritten. He flipped to the page. October 3rd, 1987. 6:22 p.m. Visual contact. Unidentified individual stationary. Coordinates listed. Fog at 85% cover. No additional contact. That was the last time I saw anyone like him, Dawn said. But it wasn't the last weird thing. What do you mean? Miles asked. Dawn leaned back. After that night, I started finding things. Rocks stacked in odd patterns below the tower. Stones with scratches. Marks I didn't recognize. Once I found a dead raccoon laid out on the step. No blood, just placed there. Rachel felt a chill crawl up her spine. Did you ever feel like he was watching you? Dawn's expression turned grim. Always. As they left, Dawn placed a hand on Rachel's arm. If your brother ran into him, he wouldn't have had a chance. That evening, back at the ranger station, Rachel plotted the coordinates Dawn had logged in 1987. They aligned with the other disappearance sites, Daniel's, Susan's, Allen's, forming a crescent pattern that hugged the western ridge of the lake. All radiating from a central point, a narrow gorge marked on old maps as Bare Needle Hollow, long since erased from modern trail guides due to landslide risks. Rachel circled it. What's there? She asked Miles. He looked at the map and whispered, maybe where Clemens made his last camp. Crater Lake National Park, Western Ridge, September 22, 1997, 7:15 a.m. Bare Needle Hollow wasn't easy to reach. The path that once led to it had been reclaimed by the forest. Landslides in the late 80s had buried parts of the ridge trail under tons of broken shale and pine. The park had since rerouted official hikes far from the area, but Miles knew a back way in, a firebreak path used by maintenance crews decades ago. He and Rachel, along with two other rangers, hiked in silence through dense fir and spruce, boots crunching on frost-hardened soil. Rachel's pulse quickened as they neared the final incline. The air was colder here, somehow more still. Even the birds seemed to avoid the place. We're close, Miles said, lifting his binoculars. There, past that split cedar. At the edge of a steep slope, the land opened into a narrow gorge, dark, narrow, and heavily shadowed by sheer rock walls on either side. It was a natural bowl, hidden from above and difficult to reach from below. A perfect place to disappear. They descended cautiously. The trees thinned, replaced by jagged outcrops and beds of moss. And then they saw it. A collapsed wooden structure barely visible beneath creeping ivy and lichen, rotting beams, hand-you-need logs, and near what had once been a door frame, a rusted hinge still clinging to a post. Miles approached it slowly. This was a cabin, he whispered. Built here, hidden. Rachel brushed away some of the ivy. Beneath it, carved deep into the wood were the initials H.C. Howard Clemens, she said. Inside, there wasn't much left. Time and weather had done their work. The roof had collapsed long ago. Rodents had stripped the bedding, but in the far corner, protected by a wall of stone, they found a sealed metal box wedged beneath a floorboard. Miles pried it open. Inside were items perfectly dry. A notebook, the pages brittle but legible. A small knife sharpened down to a sliver. A faded photograph. A woman smiling standing by a truck. The back read Margaret 1952. He lived here, Rachel said, her voice soft. And watched the world from here, Miles added. She opened the notebook. The handwriting was precise, slanted. There were no names, no dates, only descriptions, observations. Saw another hiker, tall, backpack blue. Stayed out of sight. They camped near Ridge 3, came too close, waited until dawn to move. Fire brings them. Must only use smoke at night. Page after page detailed hikers, patrols, weather, a meticulous record of solitude and of avoidance. But then near the back, a single entry. The boy asked me my name. I said nothing. He stood still. He looked like he knew me. I turned away. That could be Daniel, Rachel whispered. It could be anyone, Miles said, but his tone betrayed doubt. They collected the notebook and sealed the box for evidence. As they turned to leave, Rachel looked back one more time at the cabin, now reclaimed by the mountain. A life lived in shadows. A man who had chosen to disappear from the world and taken others into that silence. But Daniel's story wasn't over. Not yet, because as they hiked back, one of the younger rangers called out, "There's something else over here in the ravine." They rushed over, half buried under rocks and pine needles. They saw it. A torn scrap of nylon, bright orange, the color of Daniel Whitaker's missing backpack. Bare Needle Hollow, ravine floor. September 22nd, 1997, 5:45 p.m. The slope down into the ravine was steep and treacherous. Fallen pine needles had formed a slick carpet over loose shale, and the walls rose sharply on either side, turning daylight into dim twilight long before sunset. The torn nylon scrap flapped gently in the wind, caught on a branch halfway down the drop. Bright orange, faded, but unmistakable. Rachel knelt beside it, brushing away the dirt beneath. Her fingers touched something firm. "There's more," she said quietly. With care, they unearthed what remained. The frame of a backpack, shattered but still intact. A few items had survived inside. A rusted compass, its glass cracked. A crushed film canister lid intact. A leather-bound notebook, waterlogged but salvageable. Rachel clutched the notebook with trembling hands. "It's his," she whispered. This was Daniel's pack. Miles opened the film canister. Inside, remarkably dry, was a tightly rolled piece of undeveloped 35mm film. "We'll need the lab," he said carefully. Then one of the rangers called from a few yards away. "Over here." They followed the voice to a low outcrop where a few stones had been stacked, not natural, but placed. Beneath bones, small ones, likely animal, arranged in a deliberate pattern. But next to them, wrapped in wax cloth, was something else. A journal page torn, handwritten. "He told me he used to be someone else. Said the world was too loud. That he came here to forget. But the memories still follow him through the trees. He said I was the first person he'd spoken to in years. He's afraid of what he's become." Rachel stared at it. Daniel met him. He spoke to him. He wrote it down. They pressed on down the ravine, the shadows deepening. The terrain grew more chaotic. Jagged roots, twisted rocks, evidence of old slides. Then they saw it. A clearing barely the size of a small cabin floor, surrounded by stone and forest, and at its center, a makeshift grave. It had once been marked by wood, now rotted. The soil disturbed long ago. Animal tracks had collapsed one edge, but the mound was still discernible. Miles said nothing. He just knelt. Rachel stood over it, her face pale. "We need to open it." They worked in silence. It wasn't deep, barely more than 2 feet, but what they found made the air grow heavier. A wool coat badly decomposed. Human remains. A skeleton compact from time and soil. A rusted military dog tag still on a cord around the neck. Miles wiped the dirt away from the tag. He read it aloud. "Clemens H., U.S. Army 1944. Rachel stepped back, exhaling slowly. "He died here. Alone, which means someone else." "Someone else buried him," Miles replied, his voice tense. They turned slowly, looking back toward the direction of the old cabin and then deeper into the trees. The silence pressed against them. Because if Clemens was dead in this grave, then who had spoken to Daniel in 1984? Who had been watching the overlook in 1987? Who had left the stone patterns beneath the fire tower? Crater Lake National Park. Ranger HQ Archives Room. September 23, 1997, 9:40 a.m. The implications shook them both. Clemens was dead. The grave proved it. And yet the sightings, the encounters continued for 3 years after his estimated death. Miles had trouble sleeping that night. Something wasn't adding up. If Howard Clemens had perished in Bare Needle Hollow, then someone else had assumed his place or had always been there. The second shadow. Rachel, meanwhile, was digging into a new theory. She returned to Daniel's recovered notebook. Its pages, although water-stained, had a handful of legible lines. "He watched me from across the ridge again. Said nothing. He knew I had a sister. I never told him." He repeated the phrase, "The silence is safer." She turned to another page. Not Clemens, different eyes, younger. Stillness was different. Rachel underlined that phrase in red. "Not Clemens," she muttered. Then she opened the park incident logs for 1980 to 1984, cross-referencing them with unsolved crimes, ranger citations, and off-the-book reports. What she discovered made her breath catch. There had been 2 disappearances near the park before Daniel, both solo hikers, both male, in their 20s, and both cases had been listed as presumed lost to terrain. But one of them, Michael Lantry, a drifter from Northern California, had been spotted several times before vanishing. The last person to see him, Howard Clemens, logged in a ranger's margin note, said he gave water to a lone hiker, warned him about cliffs. Rachel called Miles. We need to consider that Daniel wasn't taken by Clemens. He may have been taken by someone after Clemens died. Someone who moved into that space. You're thinking a copycat or a protee or someone who found that cabin and took it over. Miles didn't answer right away. Then what if it was one of the missing hikers? Someone who went into the woods and never left. Like Clemens, but different, younger, maybe more violent. Later that day, Bare Needle Hollow. They returned to the hollow. This time, they brought more staff. They widened the search radius around the ravine and found more signs. Traps, old but cleverly concealed. A tarp shelter now collapsed. And beneath a moss-covered rock, another sealed tin. Inside, bones of small animals, feathers, and carved wooden tokens. Crude figurines of people. Each had a slash across the face. Rachel turned them over, disturbed. This isn't survival. This is something else. Then a radio crackled. One of the search team members had found something just north of the hollow. A stone circle with a central wooden post. Attached to it by leather cord was a faded square of cloth orange from a backpack. Rachel froze. It's his, she said. And then she saw the carvings on the post, initials over and over, scratched into the wood. DW, DW, DW. She turned to Miles, her voice cold with realization. Someone took Daniel, and they marked it. But who? Rachel looked around the quiet woods, the shadows between the trees, the heavy, motionless air. We need to stop assuming we're the only ones still looking. Bare Needle Hollow, Northern Edge Clearing. September 23, 1997, 5:52 p.m. The sun dipped lower behind the peaks, casting long, thin shadows through the trees. The air in the clearing had a weight to it, as if the forest were holding its breath. The wooden post at the center of the stone circle had been there for years, weathered, cracked, and blackened in places. But it was the carvings that caught Rachel's breath. DW etched over and over in uneven patterns, some deep, some barely scratched. Dozens of them. He kept coming back, Rachel murmured. Whoever did this, it wasn't one moment. It was many. Miles ran his fingers along the grooves. These are done with a blade, possibly the same knife we found in the cabin box. Rachel opened her field notebook and began documenting every visible carving, angle, and mark. Then she noticed something new. Symbols, not initials. Primitive, almost childlike. A spiral, a square, and a crude human figure with no face. Miles saw it too. This isn't just a memorial or a marker. This is ritual. The park anthropologist, Dr. Lyndon Ash, was flown in the next morning. She had spent years cataloging native petroglyphs and survivalist iconography. But when she examined the post and the carvings, her expression shifted from curiosity to unease. These aren't indigenous. They're synthetic, invented, likely by one person, untrained, but deliberate. What do they mean? Rachel asked. Dr. Nash traced the spiral with a gloved finger. Spiral usually represents return or entrapment, a loop. The square may symbolize shelter. The faceless figure that's unsettling. It's either the observer or the observed. Rachel glanced again at the initials. Or both. As they expanded the perimeter of the site, another ranger called out. Beneath a thicket of thorns, they discovered a pile of rocks arranged in a rough arch underneath a shallow pit inside bones. Not human, but carefully arranged in pairs. Always one small and one larger, always facing each other. Rachel crouched beside them. She was mimicking people or replacing them. Miles nodded grimly, and Daniel may have been the last one. Ranger headquarters late that evening. Back at base, Rachel examined the recovered figurines again. There were 7 in total, each carved from a different type of wood, each bearing a slash across where the face should be. She placed them in a line. 6 were similar, but the 7th, slightly taller, smoother, and without a slash, was different. What if this one is Daniel? She whispered. And if it was, why wasn't it marked like the others? Just then the phone rang. Miles picked up, listened, then turned to Rachel with eyes wide. That roll of film from Daniel's camera. Rachel stood up fast. What about it? There's a picture, clear one, taken near a fire, but there's a man in the background, half hidden, watching, and it's not Daniel. Rachel's voice was barely a whisper. Do we have a face? We might. Photographic Analysis Lab, Medford, Oregon. September 25, 1997. 10:13 a.m. The room was dark, but filled with quiet tension. Fluorescent bulbs buzzed overhead as the technician, a soft-spoken man named Elias Harper, adjusted the projector focus. A single frame from the recovered 35mm film filled the white screen. The foreground was familiar. A small campfire, stones circled neatly around charred wood. Behind it, a tent, the same model Daniel Whitaker had carried. A water flask half buried in pine needles. And just off-center there, Elias pointed. See that between the trees? Rachel stepped forward. It was subtle but unmistakable. Half shrouded in darkness, caught mid-motion, was a man. Just one shoulder visible. Long hair, a thick beard. The rest of his face concealed by shadow and foliage, but one eye reflected the flash like a distant mirror. Sharp, watchful. That's not Daniel, Rachel said quietly. No, Elias agreed. Whoever this is, he's watching. Miles leaned in. Can you clean the image? Elias worked in silence, running filters, enhancing contrast, adjusting resolution. The man's outline became clearer. Muscular frame, ragged jacket, something strapped across his chest. He's carrying something, Miles noted. A harness or bag. Zoom on the face, Rachel said. Elias tried, but the shadows held. The face never fully turned, but one detail pierced through. A scar diagonal across the right cheek. Rachel scribbled it down instantly. We can work with that. Crater Lake Ranger HQ Research Room. September 26, 1997. They cross-referenced local police files, park incident reports, even national missing persons cases. It was Rachel who eventually made the match. Photo ID 1980 arrest record. Name, Michael Lantry, age 26. Arrested Jackson County, Oregon. Charge, vandalism, illegal camping. Released. Charges dropped. Scar, right cheek, diagonal. He's not a victim, Rachel muttered. He stayed. Maybe he followed Clemens. Or maybe he killed him. Miles stared at the screen. And Daniel crossed paths with him. Rachel pulled out Daniel's journal once more. She turned to the entry she had read before, reading it again under new light. He told me he used to be someone else. The world was too loud. He came here to forget. Michael Lantry. He had vanished in 1981, just 3 years before Daniel did. What if he hadn't vanished at all? What if he'd made himself disappear? Back to Bare Needle Hollow. September 27, 1997. Early morning, they returned with a new focus, finding Michael Lantry, or at least the remnants of his life in the woods. Using the campfire photo as a reference, they retraced Daniel's last known campsite. 3 hours into the search, near a hidden cliff ledge, they found it. A makeshift shelter partially caved in, camouflaged with pine branches, scattered tools, handmade. And on the far wall, a tree trunk carved with another set of initials, DWML, side by side. He marked it, Rachel said, like it meant something. Miles stepped back, or like he wanted someone to remember. Then they heard it. A crunch. A snap. Someone or something moved in the trees above. Rachel and Miles froze. The wind was still. No animals stirred. Another crunch. Closer. He's still out here. Rachel whispered. He never left. Bare Needle Hollow, Eastern Slope, September 27, 1997. 4:17 p.m. The sound of movement wasn't an illusion. The footsteps were real, measured, cautious, as though someone was circling them. Rachel and Miles stood back to back, eyes scanning the dense underbrush. No radio crackled, no birds called. The forest had gone unnaturally quiet. Then another sound, not feet this time. A whistle. Low, 3 short tones, almost musical. Then silence. Miles raised his voice cautiously. Hello, this is the Park Service. If you're hurt, we can help you. No response, just the wind rustling the needles above them. Rachel's grip tightened around her flashlight, not for illumination, but as a weapon. She leaned closer to Miles. He's watching. He always watches first. 10 minutes later, deeper in the trees, following the sound, they stumbled across a narrow footpath barely visible beneath decades of pine litter. Not a trail used by rangers, a path worn by someone moving through these woods over and over, someone avoiding sight. They followed it. Half a mile in, the path forked. To the left, it bent downward toward a dry creek bed. To the right, it climbed toward a moss-covered boulder with a hollow beneath it. They split, Rachel taking the left, Miles the right, radios on, but volume low. Rachel advanced slowly, her boots sunk into wet soil. Then she saw it. Footprints fresh, bare deep. She stopped, listened. The wind passed. Then a voice from her radio. A whisper from Miles. Rachel, You need to see this. Miles's location hollow beneath the boulder. Rachel arrived breathless. Miles pointed without speaking. In the hollow, a fire ring long dead. Next to it, a stack of notebooks covered in bark. And behind it, a wall covered in carvings. Dozens, hundreds of tiny faces, all different, all without eyes. Just blank sockets over and over scratched deep into the stone. And beneath them, one phrase repeated like a mantra. You forget the face, but it never forgets you. You forget the face, but it never forgets you. Rachel's voice cracked. He was trying to erase them or himself. Miles flipped through one of the notebooks. Inside a mixture of rambling thoughts and meticulous observations, dates, weather, ranger patrol schedules, names of campers, and finally a sketch. Crude but haunting. Daniel Whitaker sitting by a fire staring at the reader. His eyes scratched out. Miles closed the notebook. He watched Daniel drew him, and then he took him. Rachel whispered. They didn't camp that night. They hiked out straight to HQ, clutching the notebooks like fragile evidence of something monstrous hiding in plain sight. Back at base, a technician examined the pages under infrared. Hidden in the margins, written in charcoal, was a phrase repeated in smaller and smaller script. She's coming. She always comes. Rachel froze. He knew I'd come back. Crater Lake Ranger HQ Incident Room. September 28, 1997. 7:12 a.m. The words haunted Rachel all night. She's coming. She always comes. It wasn't just a journal entry. It felt predictive. Rachel had returned to Crater Lake after more than a decade, not by chance, but by the pull of something unsolved, something unfinished. And somehow whoever had written that line, likely Michael Lantry, had anticipated it. She always comes. The voice echoed in her mind as she stared at the notebooks, their cracked leather covers lined on the table like relics from a fevered mind. 10:03 a.m. analysis of the final notebook. Inside the last recovered journal, there was a timeline. Fragmented entries detailing Daniel's arrival, his habits, his route around the lake, even what he cooked. And then abruptly, the entries stopped. The last one was dated July 16, 1984. And below it, only 4 words were scrolled so hard the pen had torn the page. I had to choose. Rachel stared at it. Choose what? She whispered. Miles entered with coffee and read over her shoulder. He pointed to a smaller line scribbled in the corner, barely visible under blacklight. One stays, one sees. Nearby cabin formerly belonging to Clemens. September 28, 1997, 1:17 p.m. They returned to the structure believed to have been Clemens' original shelter. The structure had long been partially collapsed, but parts of the floor were still intact. Rachel tapped along the wooden boards, hollow. She pried one up. Beneath it, wrapped in waterproof wax cloth, was a reel of audio tape. They took it back to HQ and found a machine to play it. The sound was degraded, warped with time, but the voice was unmistakable. A man, ragged, low, haunted. He keeps talking in his sleep. Keeps saying my name, but he never met me. He doesn't know I was watching. Static. Sometimes I wonder if he sees me. Not out there. In here, inside the dark part of the fire. Rachel leaned forward, blood running cold. I never wanted to hurt him. I just wanted him to understand. But he ran. He ran into the trees. So I followed. They always run, and she always comes. The tape clicked to silence. Crater Rim Lookout Tower. September 29, 1997, 6:44 p.m. Rachel stood alone at the same fire tower where Daniel had been seen years ago, where the ranger sworn he saw a man vanish into the trees. From this height, Crater Lake shimmered below, calm, deceptively peaceful. But beyond it, the forest seemed to move with a mind of its own, ancient, watching. She thought of Daniel, of Michael Lantry, of Clemens, all pulled into this place, all swallowed by its silence. And now her. She reached into her jacket and pulled out the figurine, the unmarked one she believed represented Daniel. She placed it on the railing facing the trees. You're not forgotten, she whispered. A gust of wind passed, cold and whispering like a breath or an exhale. Rachel didn't move. Not yet. Because deep in the trees, something moved back. Crater Rim Lookout Tower. 7:08 p.m. September 29, 1997. Rachel stood perfectly still, eyes fixed on the distant movement. A shadow, maybe a figure. It had disappeared between two moss-covered trunks so quickly it could have been her imagination, but she knew better now. Nothing in these woods was imagined. Her radio crackled suddenly. "Rachel, it's Miles. You still up at the tower?" She pressed the button slowly, never looking away from the trees. "Yes, I saw something. Movement. North slope. I'm heading your way. Don't move." She exhaled but didn't respond. She couldn't because for the first time she felt something shift inside her. A sense not of fear but of invitation. As though the forest was no longer pushing her away, but pulling her in. 7:27 p.m. The descent. Rachel left the tower and began walking the Ridgeline Trail, flashlight off, using only the fading twilight. Her steps were cautious but deliberate. Her hand brushed the radio once, but she didn't press it again. Something was calling, not with sound, but with presence. She followed the ridge until she reached a break in the slope, where a game trail wound down into the darker parts of Bare Needle Hollow. She paused. The same three-note whistle pierced the trees. It wasn't far now. Bare Needle Hollow, unknown sector. She reached the grove again, the one with the carved post in the circle of stones, but now there were fresh footprints in the pine needles. They led deeper. She followed until the ground leveled out into a clearing she had never seen before. At its center was a flat stone shaped like an altar. Atop it a worn leather journal, and next to it a photograph. She stepped closer. It was Daniel, but older, not a teenager anymore. A man in his 30s, unshaven, thin, alive. Rachel's knees weakened. She reached out with trembling hands. On the back of the photo scribbled in faded pencil. "He let me go, but I never left." 7:59 p.m. A second voice. Behind her, a voice, dry, cracked, human. "I didn't take him. He stayed." Rachel turned slowly. Out of the trees stepped a man, or the shell of one, beard long and gray, face half-shadowed, wearing the same tattered coat from the fire photo. "Michael Lantry?" she asked. He didn't answer, just nodded once, then pointed to the journal. "He wrote that after I told him everything." Told him what she asked. Michael stepped closer, eyes hollow. The world out there had rules, expectations, noise. But in here, you can forget who you were. He wanted that. Rachel looked back at the photo. Is he still alive? Michael looked toward the trees. He was, maybe still is, but not like before. He found quiet. A beat passed. You shouldn't look for him anymore. Rachel's journal that night. He was never taken. He was offered silence, and he chose it. I don't know if I could have made the same choice, but I understand it now. This wasn't a crime. It wasn't an abduction. It was a surrender. Final image. Crater Lake, October 1st, 1997. Rachel left the figurine and Daniel's photo at the base of the fire tower. A memorial to a boy who vanished and to a man who found something else in the forest. Miles never questioned her version of the story. Some mysteries, he said, want to stay mysteries. But late at night, when the wind rolls down off the peaks and brushes the tower rails, some rangers swear they hear a whistle. 3 notes, almost musical, drifting through the trees. And those who hear it, they never forget. Kindly help us reach 1,000 subscribers on this channel just by hitting the subscribe button and check the channel for more interesting videos. Thank you. See you on the next one.